And we're back on Newsnight tonight, focusing on day 2 of the enforcement of the Mishuki rules and what is happening in the public transport sector. I have some new numbers for you tonight, just in from the police. Earlier we told you about 4,000 offenders. Well, tonight the police telling us that they have detected 5,600 traffic offences today alone. And the crackdown will be stepped up until sanity resumes on our highways. That is what the police is saying tonight. Now, we're focusing on public transport and the crisis, and we're focusing on the rules. But earlier on, when we spoke to Professor Alfred Omenya, who is with me now as an urban planning expert, Professor, you said we're just treating the symptoms and not the disease.
Right.
What exactly ails our public transport sector today?
Yeah, I think we must ask ourselves what public transport is about. Mm-hmm. And all the nations on earth, actually, have invested quite heavily, the progressive ones, I mean, have invested quite heavily on mass transit, particularly in urban areas, but also sometimes across both urban and rural jurisdictions. Why? Yeah, because the urban economies, which are economies of concentration, normally produce more efficiently if you can move goods and people efficiently across cities and towns. We see this in Europe as early as 1940s, huge investment in public mass transit, movement of people from one part of the city to the other. We see the Asian countries following almost suit. What is interesting is that for Kenya, how did we transport people in 1920? Incidentally, we moved people around town in rail.
Okay.
Yes. The Nairobi rail was already there.
Yeah.
You could get your line from Kibra to town. You could move from town all the way to the thicker side and so on. But how are we doing it currently in the year 2018? We are doing it through matatus and through bodabodas.
Right.
Neither of those is a mass transit. Neither of those are systems.
So what you're saying is we need a mass transit to move. Okay.
We need to be able to move people and goods efficiently across our towns. And currently we don't have
because that is what would explain. I mean, a lot of Kenyans, and we will get to the feedback tonight, are, expressing gratitude and they're happy that there's sanity on our roads. Those are words that we now use.
Right.
But yet, even though today, matatus have largely been back on the roads,
right.
We still experience heavy traffic jams, at peak hours. Is this what you're saying is the major problem that we are not solving?
In fact, what is interesting, we're making the patient more sick.
How
Incidentally,
so?
when the matatus went on strike, one would have expected that there would be no traffic jam in our towns. But we had more traffic jam. Why? Because there were more private cars on the road. So the lower you go down the ladder, if you decide to use private transport, of course, that is no solution at all to mass transit. You end up with terrible traffic jams. You come to matatus, which also just came in there because of failure of public transport. It's not as bad as private transport, but on the other hand, it is not public. It's
not mass transit enough?
It's not mass transit enough.
Because matatus take up more people, certainly, than private vehicles.
Exactly. But it's not mass transit enough. For mass transit, in fact, the lowest end of mass transit, again, that has been around forever, is the bus and the bus system.
Right.
Yeah, because again, the bus will mop up so many matatus from the road. And of course, from the 70s, a number of countries have demonstrated to us how this can be done. Curitiba in Brazil, Meia-Lerne, had a very nice rapid bus transit system. Yeah. And the whole idea is that you're able to move huge numbers of people across your towns efficiently. So matatu does not reach the threshold of mass transit. In fact, matatus are there because of failure of mass transit. That's why I was calling it a system.
So there's people who opine that public transport should not be something that is handled by the private sector. that this should be handled by the state and by government. I mean, if you travel to a lot of places where you have the rail and the, you know, the light trains, the buses, that is all handled by government. This is why we're at the mercy of matatus. If they hike the fares today or tomorrow, well, it is private business anyway. What's your opinion on that? Should mass transit, should public transport actually be a function of the government?
This is a point that, again, in every country on earth, matters of transport, matters of education, matters of health, the core issues that, that you need for a functional country must be directed one way or another by the state. How then that...
Is that happening in Kenya?
No, nothing at all. I mean, what's actually happening is that government is trying to lock up these matatu operators and other comedians who are involved in this particular process. But basically, in Kenya, government must actually say, this is the system, and this is how the system would actually work, so that we're moving people efficiently. Then, of course, the way you roll out that system, are details. I mean, you could actually get into public transport. A good example is Chile, generally, and Santiago, Chile, where these guys have a very efficient public transport, both trains and the bus system. But what happens is that every 5 years, there is actually a tender that's given to private sector with conditionalities
from the government.
In terms of the quality of the buses that they will use, the destinations they will go to, the fares they will charge, and private companies bid. After every 5 years, if you have not performed, you disappear and somebody else comes in.
Well, those are some ideas that maybe we can think of. BRT has been put in place. We've drawn the red lines. We're still waiting for that. Do you think that is a solution to the transport crisis, if you like?
Of course, I mean, like I said before, the buses is the lowest entry into public transport. What I don't see is a conviction of government in rolling these out. I think it's been quite thoughtless. The minister launched that actually early this year. We're all very excited and painted one red line on Thika Road, and we're told that buses are on their way. Of course, now as usual, fake news suspecting that the people in government who intend to make a lot of money by importing buses and all these things. But actually, BRT in terms of public transport is a solution that is already there in a number of African countries. It's only that the scale is not that wide. Our neighbors, Tanzania has BRT. Nigeria has BRT. South Africa, a number of towns, Johannesburg, Cape Town,
so
George,
it is something that would
has
work
BRT.
Here? Are we executing it the right way?
No, we're not. You see, the thing is that we don't, at the end of the day, the transport solutions must be integrated. We must ask ourselves that, okay, fine, if you're going to do BRT, how does BRT relate with the matatus, if you're still going to have them, and private transport on one hand, and how does it relate, for example, with the rail transport and so on? You cannot actually just have one solution. In fact, we even have to think about people
walk. So you're saying it should be holistic.
Exactly.
And that right now it's sort of targeted without the bigger picture in mind?
Look at the statistics. In the city of Nairobi, do you know that actually between 40 to 50% of people without the strike walk to work? That is a means of transport. It is not mass transit, but it's a means of transport for people who've been denied solutions. How do we cater for them? We must think about them so that they're not run over by these guys. Then we must say, okay, fine, are we going to have matatus? How? Then are we going to have a BRT? On which roads and why?
What about light rail? Because we see that in Addis.
Light rail?
Do we have sort of the capacity for that? Even as I asked
Why
you that,
not?
There's a Thika superhighway. When it was built, it was supposed to be the silver bullet to traffic jams. Yet, people who live on Thika Road tonight will tell you that the traffic.
In fact, the irony is that again, the Nairobi Rail started operating as early as 1904. And I've asked people in this particular sector that why on earth aren't we using this particular structure and system and investment that was put to us by our colonizer, and it happens to be there. Of course, so when President Kibaki was there, what they did, they got the old trains and painted them. And they said, oh, you know, the meter gauge rail is so old that we can't get any new trains. Really? That's a lie. Japan, as we talk today, runs on a meter gauge. Runs on a meter gauge. There are the new meter gauge trains that are available around if we're serious about getting them. Of course, I mean, if you're not worried about kickbacks and all those other things. They're more expensive because majority of the world has moved to standard gauge. Okay. My point is that there are solutions outside here. Yeah. There are practical steps that you can actually move to get the solution. There are investments that are already in place. And of course, you're talking about the light rail and trams. The beauty with the meter gauge rail is that, of course, aside from the light rail, it is almost the perfect width for a tram.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And our neighbors, Ethiopia here, have trams. I mean, there's nothing magical about it. Morocco already has a tram system that's working. This is in Africa. Before we could argue that these are things that Mzungus did because they're sophisticated and because they're white. But these things are happening right here. BRT is in Tanzania. Lagos, with all its messes, has BRT. Morocco actually has a fast train system. Our neighbors, Ethiopia, have a modern train system in their cities and so on. Why can't we do it here in Kenya? And we are purporting to be the third most sophisticated economy in the continent.
Absolutely. That is a good place to leave our conversation. And you've given us quite a bit of food for thought. Professor Alfred Omenya, it is always a pleasure speaking to you, urban planning expert, joining us here on Newsnight. What do you think about everything he's had to say? The solutions are here. Are we thinking holistically enough towards solving the public transport crisis in the country? The hashtag is Newsnight. I'm looking forward to your feedback.